So I wrote this before I knew James Wines would be in the audience, so we'll see how this goes. It is common to zone out while driving on an American road trip. On the ones between the palm trees and the blizzards, these moments might significantly outnumber those committable to memory. Thanks to the interstate highway system, Charles Kuralt declared after its completion in 1956, it is now possible to travel from coast to coast without seeing anything. Many hold the same opinion that under the web of highways, America is no longer majestic. It is now vast. Of course, this would be true if not for the many small businesses that try their best to falsify this claim. Roadside attractions of various scales and levels of absurdity lurk just outside the interstate's right-of-way, all in an effort to relieve travelers of their boredom with a new type of majesty. The world's tallest thermometer, foam henge, enchanted highway, hole in the rock, and maybe the most mysterious and self-aggrandizing of all, the Thing. Each one has its own unique qualities, but they nearly all draw attention to themselves in the same way. On oversized billboards, plastered along the highway for miles in each direction. They demonstrate what Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown stated as clear facts. On the highway, the symbol is more important than the building. But there is one speculative project, virtually swept under history's rug, and fortunately not mentioned last night, which took this pop truism to new heights of grandeur and subversion. Proposed for a stretch of I-80, Site's 1974 rest stop would have been both an advertisement for a roadside attraction and a main attraction in itself, unsettling the typical American relationship between sign and building. The original description of the proposal is worth quoting here in full. Developed as part of a bicentennial project sponsored by the state of Nebraska, the proposal by Site was intended to be perceived by the motorist at high speed. The stenciled words rest stop were to be painted on the roadway as though metamorphosized from the dotted roadway divider lines. Beginning several miles before the actual rest area, the letters would grow in definition until the words rest stop were completely formed about 1 mile before the site. Upon reaching the grass gore area, the letters would become three-dimensional, beginning with the letter R and continuing in both 2- and 3-dimensional form. At the center of the gore, the concrete letters would begin to drop away until they disappeared at the opposite end of the land surface. The stenciled highway letters would reverse as well as return into the dotted paving divider. These reversed letters could then be read through the rear view mirror by the passing motorist. For a project so deceptively simple in images, Rest Stop belongs in a field of its own. It is an elegant response to a handful of parallel advancements of the 20th century, including those in interstate infrastructure, consumerism, and automobile culture. Its unusual nature and relative obscurity demands a renewed speculative appraisal. What would be Rest Stop's impact on the American landscape had it been completed? The obvious should be stated first. No site is more appropriate than an open stretch of Nebraska for a project this self-involved. The multitudinous advertisement is plainly more suited to a plot of the Cornhusker State than the flashing lights and sounds of Times Square or the Las Vegas Strip. Because its unique brand of spectacle is defiantly non-electronic, it likely could not garnish attention when set amongst its more conspicuous alternatives. Nebraska has famously few towns, roadside attractions, and significant landscape features along I-80, allowing Rest Stop to speak to its itinerant audience without competition. Because its intended effect is only legible by the steady highway speed of a moving vehicle and what otherwise appears gibberish to the pedestrian or the Oregon Trail pioneer, it is a project that challenges yet is intimately related to the conventions of automobile culture. Like so many other highway advertisements, its presence is too enveloping to ignore. Though it is also not for the passive spectator, for its precise message can only be observed by a motorist more observant than the typical, zoned-out American traveler. So more accurately, it has to be activated by an observer, one with an unshakable control over their steering wheel, accelerator, and capacity for engagement. Describing this type of visual relationship between the observer and the observed, the theorist Jonathan Crary writes that the corporeal subjectivity of the observer suddenly becomes the sight on which an observer is possible. The human body, in all its contingency and specificity, generates the spectrum of another color, and thus becomes the active producer of optical experience. It is important to note here that the attention and control rest-stop demands is inseparable from the original intention of the interstate highway system itself. Keller Easterling wrote that using statistical models, traffic engineers designed the interstate as a response to vehicle populations. Engineers derived formulas to handle variable loads at different times of the day, but the equations always yielded the highway as a fixed register of dynamic equilibrium or movement at a particular speed. Traffic engineering principles determined everything from the dimension of the highway to the turning radius of the driveway, and they also govern the hierarchy of tertiary, secondary, and minor streets. Not only was the organization of the highway network contingent on vehicle populations, but the design of the roadway itself was engineered to be viewed from a static position inside the vehicle. Therefore, the smooth and homogeneous experiences guaranteed by the interstate highway system are challenged by sight's highly alluring, slowly enveloping rest stop. And whether or not interstate travelers wish to participate in rest stop, they are within its visual scope for at least 5 minutes. Like a mirage in the plains or a consumerist apparition, rest stop could have been a roadside attraction, maybe the first roadside challenge, more captivating than the country's largest toilet and George Washington's preserved footsteps put together. Its singularity and difficulty of approach would have allowed it to perform a quiet magic for its viewer, yet its role as a participatory spectacle runs the risk of being so engrossing as to undermine its original role as an advertisement for a secondary object, the rest stop. Rest stop's rest stop is nowhere to be found in the images or text provided by sight. It is likely not worthy of documentation and bears little distinction when placed aside any other rest stop in America. The symbol is not only more important than the building, it is more important than its own message. The big sign in the little building may have been the rule of Route 66, as Venturi and Scott Brown once claimed, yet Sight's rest stop carries this truism beyond its logical end, to a place where the service being advertised potentially loses business, because its advertisement is in fact too captivating. The committed traveler might likely reject the opportunity to patronize the business advertised to instead remain engaged in the animation of rest stop. If dedicated, this observer would synchronize the faint whooshing sound of each frame with the cyclical hum of their car engine, and, after a few miles, the whisper of their own breath. While cruise control might make paying attention easier, the minute variations in depth between frames, implemented either by incidents in the topography or by design, would be irrevocably lost. The proper method of driving through rest stop would require one's foot to tap between the gas and brake pedals with the fluency of Morse code. Yet the reward would greatly outweigh the effort. The evenly spaced lines on the road that had been consistently standardized for thousands of uninterrupted miles to keep drivers from careening off the highway would suddenly and slowly transfigure into a flickering statement of the English language, floating from the pavement into the third dimension, rest stop. A precedent is found in Robert Smithson's 1966 proposal for the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. 8 years prior to the development of rest stop, Smithson began to develop Dallas-Fort Worth into what he described as aerial art, a set of sculptures in the clear zones surrounding the runways that were not intended to be observed on the ground, but rather by pilots ascending from and descending into the terminal. It would have been made of many materials discernible as a sequence only from high above and at a very fast pace, with compositions as large as, according to Smithson, about the length of Central Park. Like Smithson's airport, rest stop is a response and a challenge to the modes of visuality that modern technologies of mobilization engender. As the car, the plane, and other modes of transportation attempt to standardize vision beyond human locomotion, projects like rest stop intend to undermine that standardization with intense focus and commitment. The principles of spectacle and participation are here an exact science, one engineered as closely and as carefully as the combustion engine. Adding to the lexicon of sight attainable at intense speeds, rest stop is an infrastructural missive to the bigness of America and its consequential excess, for the monumentality of its presence against the relative insignificance of its message. Rest stop would not have made an idle fool of its close observers. Though its exact message is not nearly as accessible as those of neon billboards or rotating spotlights, the effort required to activate it would have challenged drivers to fall out of their stupors and pay attention to something much greater than their next destination. Next to making it across the country in one piece, activating Rest Stop would have been one of the American traveler's greatest achievements. Thank you.